My 5 or 6-year-old daughter in suburban New Jersey came home from school one day and she said, "Mommy, the kids say I'm going to hell."
I grew up kind of atheist by default. I grew up in Kansas in the Bible Belt, and so there were a lot of people there who were very religious and told me about all sorts of horrible things that were going to happen to me because I wasn't religious, or I wasn't Christian. And so I grew up with a very negative opinion of organized religion that stayed with me for quite a while. I would have identified as a militant atheist for most of my years through high school and college.
I don't know where I heard about the Unitarian Universalist church, but I knew that there was a group that accepted many beliefs with the true search for meaning, however you got to it, that was fine, and that they didn't tell you that you had to believe in heaven or hell.
I grew up Unitarian Universalist. My parents were really looking for a spiritual community that could nurture my brother and I, and that had room for a belief in science, awe at the natural world, respect as an utmost value, and particularly for space for their own spiritual and religious roots.
As someone who was multiracial and grew up in the late 60s and 70s, a time when there weren't that many multiracial folks, I was always sort of in between things, sort of in this weird kind of liminal space. And so Unitarian Universalism in a lot of ways was my first home in the world.
I cried the first time I came to a service. I felt a sense of belonging there that I never felt in the Methodist Church. I mean, even though I was the only Asian American in the congregation, I felt the beliefs that the acceptance of who I am and my search, that I would be just fine here and it would be a great place to support raising my children.
I joined a family circle. It's a small group, and then I can meet them every month, because the church talk a lot about peace, about love, including love myself. So I think that's kind of topic attracted me.
I had heard of Unitarian Universalism because of my activism in college and knowing that Unitarian Universalists were more progressive or supportive of some of the causes I was involved in. I said, maybe I'd be curious what this Sunday service is, and then really found out, this is actually quite inspiring.
There are so many churches, there are so many so-called religious organizations where people have to deny their existence. They have to deny their authentic selves. This is one place where a person can truly be themselves and be welcomed and accepted and embraced.
The congregation that I went to as a young kid was a UU congregation where LGBTQ folks would gather, that had a role in the local pride parade, that was very outspoken about a woman's right to abortion. And so all of those things were very much part of what it meant to be Unitarian Universalist, and that has continued to be true for me.
I think part of my journey in Unitarian Universalism was being adopted by a lot of Black leaders who allowed me to grapple with that aspect of myself and who I was as a young adult, and then just nurtured me and mentored me in claiming my own identity. And that's a gift that I try to pass on to others.
I feel like finding UU community in high school was something that just woke up a spark inside of me, and I knew that I had to keep pursuing that.
After 9/11, we really felt like we were missing that community because we didn't have family nearby, and of course the whole country was just trying to make sense of what was happening, and we were thinking that really it would be a good time to find a community that thought about some of these bigger issues. And I, still in my militant atheist mode, knew very little about Unitarian Universalism except the fact that you didn't have to believe in God. So I said, okay, we'll go look for a church, but a Unitarian Universalist congregation is the only church that I'm willing to set foot in. And as it happened, the UU church in my hometown met in a daycare center and we set up folding chairs every Sunday. So it really didn't have any of the pews and the high ceilings and all the sort of trappings of organized religion that made me nervous. It felt very non-threatening to me, and the sermons from our minister were very intellectual. They were very much head-focused types of sermons, and so I felt very comfortable there. I didn't feel like it was really religious, and so it was a very comfortable place for me to start going to church.
And the minute I heard the word church, I was like, nope. It's very Christian. They're gonna try and proselytize. And when I came here, it was about, the words like justice and compassion and service. I was blown away. I was like, this can't be right. Like, this is not church. There's no mention of God. So I kept coming back thinking that my bubble is gonna burst. It never did. And I just fell in love with the service part of it, right? The social justice part of it that I just immersed myself in, which was missing.
And like anything, your first time there, you're kind of tentative. We sat in the back, we kind of just listened. But it happened that we realized these people don't talk about God and Jesus and all the crucifix and all that stuff. They talk about things that are like happening right now. And it was a really welcoming vibe. There's very little in the way of doctrinal stuff that goes on here. It's more like bringing people together who are concerned about what's happening in our physical world, but also recognize in their own way that there's something in the spirit that is moving.
UUism provides like the best opportunity for being human beings, for giving us spiritual grounding, and for allowing us and encouraging us to explore our faith and find our way in the world while serving and helping other human beings.
One of the best things about the Unitarian Church is how many social activist groups we have. There are people working on environmental justice and they're doing great things, going to the Capitol and lobbying. There's a book club for reading books by non-white authors.
I just know that the people I encounter now are very, very sincere. They care about what's happening in terms of people who are unhoused. They care about mass incarceration. They care about the fact that there is a need for social change in the direction of greater equity and inclusion, and I like that.
You're not just coming to being a UU because you're not happy with your religion that you grew up with. You're coming there because of the beliefs, and we can grow and learn from each other's beliefs.
It's not like you can believe anything and be UU. No, we believe in love and justice and dignity. Those are deeply important, but you might be polytheistic, monotheistic, atheistic. That doesn't mean that you can't be good and loving and uphold other people's dignity and freedom and liberation. And so to me, that's actually the beauty of it, and that there can be spiritual dimensions. And for me, spiritual is just connecting with values, connecting with self, connecting with the earth, connecting with heritage. And so all of those pieces became more important to me.
So I would say that I joined a Unitarian Universalist congregation looking for community, but over the years, it really became less about, the community is still very important, but I began to embrace the religious part of it, and I began to let go of a lot of the wounds that had led to the animosity toward organized religion. And so now I really feel Unitarian Universalism not only is a place to have a community, but it's also a way that helps me live my life. It helps me be a better person. I would say that's really why I stay a Unitarian Universalist, is because I feel like it challenges me to be the best person I can be, challenges me to think beyond my own sort of selfish inclinations, despite the fact that it is difficult to be a Unitarian Universalist in a majority white denomination. I've been able to carve out a place for myself where I feel comfortable and where I feel like I can live my faith and live my values.
I identify as a Unitarian Universalist, I think that's all I need to describe myself spiritually. But I would say I also draw on my ancestors, who are mostly, as far as I know, Hindu and Catholic. And I also draw a lot on Judaism as a theology and a culture and a religion, as well as pagan practices.
We have 3 children. My oldest is in 12th grade. She has her own sets of beliefs. My 8th grader has her own sets of beliefs, and my 3rd grader will develop his own sets of beliefs, as long as we're respectful. And Unitarians have helped us with that.
So I am a Unitarian Universalist Hindu. Unitarian Universalism provides me with a framework in which to practice my Hindu faith. And into that, I also bring my Muslim heritage and my Buddhist practice. So, I would consider myself a theological crossbreed, a spiritual mutt, a religious hybrid, whatever you wish to label me as. I think I'm all that and more. What is to me valuable, that I cherish about Unitarian Universalism, is it provides a pluralistic container in which I can hold these multitudes and hold them with integrity. So it's not like a cafeteria religion where I can pick and choose what I want and create a spirituality that is mix and match. It's actually an opportunity for me to go deeper within and be present and engage. So our worship calendar marks, celebrates, and honors holidays and holy days and people and prophets from different religious traditions.
I feel like Hinduism and Unitarian Universalism are really aligned. Both of them believe in service, and that's the very fundamental, tenet of Hinduism. And the more I dug into it, the more I realized that Hinduism is really about pluralism. Hinduism is actually not even recognized as a religion in the Indian Supreme Courts, because we believe that Hinduism is a way of life, which is why no one can convert into Hinduism, right? Because people believe that everybody is born a Hindu. Hindu is, again, it's Hindu meaning you're a human being and you are in your own quest for truth. The way you come to that truth is your chosen way, which means you can, worship Jesus, you can worship, Allah, you can worship anybody you want, you can worship Krishna. And the way you arrive at your truth, that's the journey, is Hinduism.
Part of my devotional practice is chanting. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahai. Many of the Sanskrit prayers and chants that I learned as a child, as well as ones that I have learned that come from many of the sacred texts of the Hindu tradition.
Hinduism believes in the divine, which is within everybody. And that's a shapeless, genderless, formless form or being. It's the divine spark. It's called Brahma. And so Hindus believe that all these deities are the representation of that inner, that being or that form.
Our theology is a pluralistic theology that is grounded in an invitation to engage with diversity, not just celebrate diversity as the cliche goes. And engaging with diversity calls for listening, calls for seeing, and calls for experiencing as is seen and experienced by those who are grounded in those traditions. And I believe our theology and our worship is expansive enough to hold that. at the center, not at the margin. If we are to embody our pluralistic theology, our practices need to embody that as well. And that requires a reimagination of how we worship. And when we do that, we change.
For a lot of folks, it's just not appealing and not accessible to go to church on Sunday morning. But coming to a community meal on a Sunday night and singing together feels like exactly what I might want to do or what's spiritually nourishing to me. Or living in an intentional housing community with people with shared values where we get to build a daily rhythm that is grounded in our values does feel really appealing. My faith is totally inseparable from a commitment to justice and liberation for all people. I have some family who've been through the criminal punishment system and spent some time doing volunteer work in the prison system and really saw how, at least for some people, spiritual community was such a crucial and important way of having an identity. So as a community minister right now, I get to be alongside people who are in some way trying to fight for freedom.
We've been extremely active on the issue of immigration for more than a decade. In fact, right before the pandemic, we were hosting a refugee who was a woman of color and also trans. So a lot of our activism is, kind of the traditional being out on the streets or writing or advocating. And some of it's been more personal, like the relationship that we had with Erica.
Through Unitarian Universalism, through having this faith community that brings together people from all different walks of life, I've been exposed to people who are very different from me, from age diversity to gender diversity to learning about people from different cultures, different abilities. And I think that these are opportunities I would not have sought out on my own because it's so much easier just to be with people who are like you. But my Unitarian Universalist faith calls me to something more.
I would say the biggest challenge still for me in creating these spaces of belonging is continuing to decenter whiteness. That is always a problem that Unitarian Universalism has had.
I was the only Asian person there, or even the person of color.
Growing up in my congregation, it was, my mom and my sister and me and a few other people. There was something about always just kind of feeling like the other, or feeling like we had less of a claim to Unitarian Universalism than others did.
I had a crisis of faith and ultimately felt that I had to leave that church. It was actually really a good thing because as my sense of myself as an Asian American Unitarian Universalist developed and matured, I felt more and more out of place in this church that I had served so willingly and so lovingly for so many years. In retrospect, I think that my withdrawing from active participation in the brick and mortar opened up time and space for relationships in my life that helped me grow.
Our faith is informed and inspired by ideas in Judaism and Christianity, not from Islam. So, although I don't practice as a Muslim, I feel I'm still culturally a Muslim. And so, for me, being in the UU space is somewhat doubly difficult. And I know that there are Muslims within the UU space, but I haven't quite found a group of non-practicing Muslims within the UU space.
I think you have pockets of greatness in Unitarians and in the congregations, but they're still trying to figure out how do we handle race.
Nobody had ever asked me about myself, about my roots, where I come from. It's almost as if people are afraid to talk about the fact that my skin is different. It's a skin that I love. So what I was perceiving as this radical welcome Once I started thinking about it, I realized that it is kind of wounding because it was about assimilation. You come here, we're not going to ask you. We don't care about what you were like before you came to a UU church. Just come here and be one of us. And I have gone to other churches and talked about how, wounding that can be for a person of color not to be seen.
We are all inextricably interconnected. So the issue is humanity. It's really not race. And we have to keep seeing where changes can and need to be made. And we have to continue to work at breaking down our own fear and doubt around people who aren't like us. Even in faith communities, people don't go to places where they can meet others. They tend to go to their church. But the thing about faith is you don't need to understand the language. You can feel the vibrational quality of a welcoming space versus an unwelcoming space.
I've served this congregation for 10 years. We have seen a significant shift. We are more diverse than when I was first called here, but we are predominantly white. And many of our practices, our rituals, our customs are rooted in the dominant culture. And unless we find ways to shift that, reimagine those, to center a more multicultural, pluralistic way of being, we're not going to change, really.
To me, it's not about just being in the room. It's about what it means to do transformative work and to build beloved community. If we're truly doing that work, how is it that we also have to change? We have to change what we do, how we do it, what kinds of things that we provide, and also who's at the table. It's not easy to make change, and we're going to make mistakes along the way. We're not perfect. We're not necessarily trying to be perfect. We're trying to be better.
So the book that I wrote is called Mistakes and Miracles, Congregations on the Road to Multiculturalism. It's a book that I co-authored with the Reverend Nancy Palmer Jones. We ended up profiling 5 different congregations who are on the road to multiculturalism. One of the reasons that I think the book was solicited in the first place was because there were a lot of resources on multicultural congregations, but they were all focused on Christian congregations. And so one of the questions that we wrestled with in chapter 1 of the book is, what is it about Unitarian Universalism, which is a creedless faith, that calls us to do this work? There's a hunger by congregations who recognize that this is the future of our faith, and they want to know how to go about doing this.
I know that the places where I felt most at home have often been in BIPOC UU spaces, like drum spaces for UUs of color. And I often feel in those spaces also like an outsider because I'm often a decade or 2 younger than the next youngest person there. And so I think also being biracial and also always feeling like I'm in or out has been a struggle in being a person of color and also a young person of color within Unitarian Universalism. That's one of my goals, is to work on inviting people into the spaces that I create, or inviting people of color in.
It is not easy to be nurtured by an aspiration and not by reality. Many of us came into this faith because we were drawn by the premise and the promise of this faith. And when we find that the practice of this faith does not comport with the premise and the promise of this faith, it can be very challenging and disheartening as well. But what draws me back is I deeply resonate with the tradition, our pluralistic commitment that allows for me to bring my whole self here.
I believe very strongly our fourth principle is a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Unitarian Universalists are great at the freedom part. We're individualistic. We love to have our freedom of belief. But I maintain that we are not doing a responsible search for truth and meaning if we are not learning from all the different people and cultures and wisdom that there is in the world. And if we stay this very monocultural, white-dominated, focused religion, that's not a responsible search for truth and meaning. The other thing is that our Universalist roots tell us that revelation is not sealed. And that tells me that we always need to be searching for more meaning and seeking to really understand and embrace the whole of humanity. And that's what calls me to do this work.
Most of us are not going to get everything we want from our spiritual community because spiritual communities are made up of people, and as humans, we're just imperfect. I'm part of a number of progressive Asian American community groups, and that's where I go when I need to be amongst other progressive API folks. But when I want to sing my heart out or cry or pray, when I want to be amongst people who are unabashedly, unapologetically religious and unapologetic about fighting for a world where we are all free and well and liberated, then I go to my UU community.
I feel so passionately that we can be more than we are as a faith community. We are not experiencing the kind of diversity in our congregational life that we need to experience in our lives to be whole as BIPOC folks, right? And especially true as Asian Americans, that we need to experience this. You know, our spiritual life is about tapping into our wholeness. And if you ask people to leave their racial identity at the door, you're asking them to tap into their wholeness, but to leave an important part of themselves behind, and that just doesn't work. So it's really important for us to keep pushing on the larger systems, and then also to create these spaces and support these spaces where we can be together.
One of the things I love about UU is, you know, you really have a group of dedicated lifelong learners. We talk about tough and big problems. So I have a huge appreciation, and I would say, you know, emphasizing on deep personal work, not just talk about the surface things, comfortable things. As uncomfortable as things sometimes can be, but we learn how to soothe ourselves, how to find that center, and how to support each other.
There is a program called Beloved Conversations. Having a moderated session with people and talking about topics that are really painful. And it could be topics that bring out some really deep-seated feelings, but I believe it makes people better. And if you talk to some of these people that have gone through the training and have gone through the sessions, they will say, I really never thought about these things connected. Oh, I never really thought about this so much because I had buried it, but I feel better. I feel more liberated.
What I saw time and time again when I talked to my friends or talked to other young adults is that there are so many people who are actually craving spiritual community, but they don't know where to find it. And I know so many people who I can just picture 10 years down the road, you know, maybe they have a partner, they're settled down, they have a kid, they're totally gonna go to a UU church. So what if they just started going now? And a lot of just that perspective has guided me. And, you know, it doesn't need to be an evangelical thing. I'm not pushing my faith or Unitarian Universalism on anybody, but it's something that a lot of people are hoping for and looking for a place to be vulnerable. We call it heart space because we try to move from our head space into our heart space and just be in community with each other. If we can just have a few people get together and light a chalice and sing a song and have a conversation, then, you know, that is changing the world for people.
I'm currently on the Pacific Western Region Emerging Adult Task Force. We're working on building resources and such for emerging adults so we can feel connected to each other. We're currently working on the other side of the bridge worship, which is for bridging high school seniors, so graduating seniors so they feel support and a welcoming community instead of what other emerging and young adults felt, which is called cliffing, where we graduate and we fall off onto the other side with no support and people to maybe connect with. And then I'm also on the Mosaic Learning and Advisory team, which is working on pushing out material to congregations on anti-racism.
I think a lot of us are yearning for, like, what is the depth and what traditions, what practices, and what people are gonna have my back when a parent is dying or a toddler is out of control or I lost my job or I got my dream job and the toll that it's taking on my personal life or my physical health is super high. All of those like daily challenges, I think there's also a piece of us that wants to be part of a spiritual tradition that stretches across time and space and that offers us practices, like things to do regularly that connect us with a spirit of love and God and justice larger than ourselves, and a community that holds us, that offers us comfort, and that also holds us accountable.
I think being spiritually challenged is the best part. It's also the most difficult part. In our faith, we are called to love and to love unconditionally. And sometimes there are people who are hard to love. But my faith calls me to do my best and to live in covenant and to live in covenant with people who are sometimes very unlike me. It broadens my horizons. It deepens who I am. I would say that the relationships I've formed while being a Unitarian Universalist have been truly transformative and made me closer to the kind of person that I want to be.
My transitioning and my interest in Unitarianism has been closely related. I would say because both of them allow for a lot of flexibility, a lot of openness, and not necessarily adhering to any rigid boundaries or guidelines. What has attracted me to it in particular are some of the value statements and the acknowledgments that are given to various peoples, diversity, acknowledgement and recognition and respect for a wide range of beliefs and origins where people come from.
And I love at my particular service, they always end the service with saying, "And now our service truly begins." And they remind us about how, it is a privilege to be able to express generosity. And it is also a blessing to be able to receive because you remember humility. And I love that.
I think we all need really different things from our spiritual communities and also different things at different times in our lives. And I think for many of us, we need a spiritual community that can offer us a break, that can offer us a place to just put down the weight of the world, the weight of our personal lives. There's just so much pressure that most of us are under to make rent, care for children, care for elders, and then maybe, if we have a little bit of time, care for ourselves and our spirits and our thriving. And I hope that our Unitarian Universalist spiritual communities can be there for us when we just need to put down the weight of the world, when we're going through something really challenging, and can also be there for us when we're on fire with wanting to change the world.
Elizabeth, Joseph, Jonifer, and so many others have shown me what it's like to grow up UU and be a UU young adult and be a person of color and serve this faith. And I want to be just like them. And I also don't want to have to go through all of the pain and heartbreak they've gone through. And I know they don't want that for me either. My hope is that, my experience will be a little bit easier and that'll make it easier for the next person too. I think something that's really important to me is finding the places in our faith that continue to strengthen you. And I have worked really hard to figure out where those places are. And those spaces are in community with religious educators and musicians and UUs of color and young people and children. And all of those spaces feed me in different ways. And as I go on this path to becoming a minister, I want to continue to find places that bring me that strength and community and that spark that I found when I was 16 and decided that this was really the path that I wanted to pursue. And I want to help cultivate that for others as well.
In many areas, I think our spiritual communities have become better places for people like myself who identify as a queer person, a person of color, a multiracial person.
I would like to be able to see the change in acceptance of people of different educational levels, financial levels, religious beliefs, color, as far as skin tone and ethnicity, having the commonality of their beliefs of the inherent worth and dignity of others.
One of the things that the Reverend Fred Muir, who is the former minister at the UU Church of Annapolis, said that has always stuck with me is that liberal churches, because they don't unite around creed, tend to unite around culture. And I think that's what's happened with Unitarian Universalism. We're a young religion, and when you're young, you are trying to figure out who you are, and you're not necessarily thinking about being diverse and being universal. But there's nothing about the message of Unitarian Universalism that is a white message. I think it's really just the way we've evolved, being centered in the United States, and that's something that we can overcome and we need to overcome if we're going to be relevant to the world.
If we continue the way we are, we're probably going to be gone in 20 years. What we have and what we practice today is not what we need, the world needs.
So many of the things that worked for a smaller, frankly less diverse, economically, culturally, ethnically church, all of that's going to get reinvented.
There's a lot of UUs that are used to a traditional Sunday service. You do a Sunday service, we get in seats, and then we do some music, and we do readings, and there's some sort of a sermon or homily, a reflection that's given. I don't know that everyone experiences their spiritual life in that way. I think that's an important space to have and maintain. But I also think, especially when I talk to Asian Pacific Islander folks, some people maybe just want to do prayer individually or have a shrine or altar or space that you can go to for some quiet meditation practices. And for some folks, it might be a Vesper service or something that's a little bit more about singing or meditation, that's not necessarily as prophetic and about giving homilies and reflections, but just about going inward and doing it as a community. So I actually think the way that we even think of what is a congregation and what is the heart of it might have to shift in order for people to want to be there. Is your experience one that's welcoming, that creates a sense of belonging? Because if it isn't, why are we trying to be like, come, you should come here? Or you just come here and become part of what we're already doing. But I don't really want to hear your voice when it comes to what we should be doing or what would make you feel welcome. So to me, it can't be an assimilationist approach. I think that it's about opportunity and invitation.
I know there are lots of buzzwords, right, going around in Unitarian Universalist Church, and all well-meaning. One of them is radical welcome, right? Radical hospitality. My thought is that we can't just be radically hospitable once people have joined our church, right? After they've crossed that threshold. That's easy. So I feel like that radical hospitality has to start before people become part of your congregation. And that's where I feel that we are not doing a good job.
People have experienced religious trauma. Perhaps that's why they became Unitarian Universalists. And so there can be a lot of fear around saying, let's generate excitement and bring in new membership, because it's perceived as proselytizing or coercing people. So I think there's a broader question about the willingness of Unitarian Universalists even to kind of engage in telling our story and inviting people in. And I think as we question, why aren't we doing that? And really dealing with some of the healing, especially if it's because of past religious traumas that people feel like, I've experienced being told you need to come and join this religious group or you're a bad person. That's not what I think Unitarian Universalism is or will be or should be. But I think we have to have like realer conversations about why it seems scary to folks to have the doors flung wide open.
I think that Unitarian Universalism needs to undergo a profound culture change. And I think that there are people, especially people in leadership, who recognize that. And as somebody who almost left Unitarian Universalism herself 12 years ago after a terrible experience with racism, I can't fault anybody who makes that choice, because for every moment that we delay this transformation, there is hurt, there is loss, and there is pain, sometimes incredible pain. It's hard sometimes to separate the fundamental core message of our faith from the institutions, from the very human, very imperfect and flawed people that form these institutions.
I think the aspirational ideals of Unitarian Universalism are valid and worthwhile, but they may look very different in the implementation, and that's okay. I mean, we're a living tradition, and we need to move forward.
So how do we turn the beautiful words we say or the image we hold ourselves, beloved community, how do we turn that words into actionable steps? And not only we can inspire ourselves, our community, and hold ourselves accountable.
I think that in a generation, we might be able to get to a place where we are representing the communities that we're in, where our congregations look more like our communities and our country. But I think that the work is more than just about the appearances. I think it's about creating belonging, and it's about the kind of transformation that we actually need to engage in order to be different.
If we make the change and really live into the promise of who we are, in order to be a religion for the 21st century, not just in word and theology, but in practice as well, I imagine us to be a vibrant, multicultural, multiracial, multigenerational, pluralistic religious community.
I think part of being an aspirational faith is always being a little bit more aspirational and hoping for things that I can't even imagine now. But I think I would want to see a place where we truly embrace diversity in all of its forms, where we are truly experiencing and practicing radical welcome, where mutual aid and community care are standard expectations, where people can make mistakes and keep learning from them, and where harm is not caused to the most marginalized among us.
In so much of US culture, being religious is synonymous with having right-leaning values or with political conservatism. We, as religious people who have progressive values, I think our world needs them in this time, and particularly our Universalist belief that there is no one who is outside of the circle of love. We haven't had an organized religious left that has contended with the religious right, but I hope one day we do. And I hope that the religious left gets to show that love for ourselves and for all people and liberation for all people is actually a far more holy value than a religion that discriminates or denigrates or takes rights away from people.
If I were talking to a friend or a neighbor or a coworker who identified as Asian or Pacific Islander and they were considering Unitarian Universalism, I would tell them to give it a try. I would be honest about the challenges that our faith faces with regards to being welcoming of people from different cultures, because that's a reality and I would not want to deny that reality. But I think Unitarian Universalism has so much to offer anybody, and I think our central message is so important and so optimistic that I know that being Unitarian Universalist has made me a much better person than I would be without it, and I would want that transformation for everybody.
Here you can find a home. Here you can belong. Here you are loved. And here you will have the opportunity to co-create the beloved community in a way that will be challenging and life-sustaining.